we're one push of a finger away from total destruction by thousands and thousands, more than 10,000, I think 12,000 nuclear weapons pointing to one another. And your country and my country are the first one to be destroyed. Why do we want to go in this way? Isn't there anybody who thinks of the long term, who thinks rationally? Humanity has one main enemy, which is its own irrationality.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast where we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. It's a welcome back for my guest today, his second appearance on this podcast. He's a man with a lot of big ideas. He has spent a lifetime challenging our understanding of reality. He's one of the world's leading theoretical physicists, helping to develop some of the boldest ideas about quantum mechanics, gravity, space, and time. Carlo Rovelli has become one of science's great storytellers. Through best-selling books like The Order of Time and Helgoland, he has brought complex questions about the universe to millions, arguing that reality is far stranger and more beautiful than we imagine. But his new book, 85 Seconds to Midnight, is not about physics, but about its consequences, specifically nuclear bombs. It is a physicist's argument against rearmament. Carlo Rovelli, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So if you could change the world now, how would you change it?
I would modify it so to avoid with what I think is unfortunately likely direction we're going to, which is nuclear catastrophe.
You think we're heading there?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance we're getting here.
The book is called 85 Seconds to Midnight, which is taken from the Doomsday Clock.
Yeah.
Can you explain
why
they decide we're so close to it?
Let me put everything is one line. We have more than 10,000 H bombs, hydrogen bombs, which are sufficient to kill them almost all and devastate the planet, wiping out civilization, create a nuclear winter, a total catastrophe. And we're fighting once against the other one, like dogs. And the amount of enmity and confrontation is constantly increasing, has been constantly increasing in the last years. We talk openly about war. We talk about using nuclear weapons. There was in the past, for many decades, a clear awareness that nuclear war would have been catastrophic. And a careful managing by the top powers to avoid it is not there anymore. These and other reasons are what make me think, but it's not just my own opinion. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, from which the title comes, it's a body of scientists that try to use objective ways to estimate the likelihood or the danger of the risk of a nuclear catastrophe. And in the last years, it has constantly increased. But more important than that, it has never been higher than now.
And why do you think that is?
For a number of reasons. When the United States exploded the first two, the only bombs used in war on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which, by the way, were much, much smaller than the current nuclear arsenal. The current bombs are 1,000 times more powerful than those. At the time, the world went under shock because of that. In addition, was coming out from catastrophic period of war. During the 20th century, 100 million humans were killed by other humans. We killed one another up to 100 million once because we typically do that. Something changed in the 40s because thanks to my trade, nothing to be proud about, now we have a definitive way to massacre one another with nuclear weapons. People raised the alarm, intellectuals raised the alarm, normal people reacted, politicians were keenly aware that a nuclear confrontation could lead to a real disaster. And even in the highest moment of the confrontation during the Cold War, both sides knew that they should do absolutely everything possible to avoid a nuclear confrontation, in fact, to the point that they avoided direct confrontation. There was a long understanding, which almost lasted for almost a century, in which the two big nuclear power, Soviet Union and the US, and later even Russia and the US, were very careful on never shooting to one another, right? There were wars all around, was not an ideal war, not at all, because of the awareness of the problem. Now things have changed. The Cold War has finished. There was a moment in which it seemed the US to be the only superpower dominating the world. Now there is a rebalancing of power again, so things are moving. That awareness is lost. People are not talking about that. People are not thinking about that. Talking about atomic bombs seems almost something out of fashion, something our fathers did, not ours. Now there are not two but three superpowers because China is coming out. And so deterrence is much more risky and dangerous without just two people looking each other in the eyes and say, well, let's avoid that. Plus there's AI. And if big powers don't use AI for managing nuclear confrontation, they put themselves in a weak position with respect to the other. If they do, as they're going to do for sure, the control, there is a high risk that the control escapes to human at some point. AI could compute that is convenient to start a nuclear war. There's a number of reasons. The overall reason is that bellicosity is increasing. War is increasing. This, again, it can be measured. People measure with objective criteria. In the last 10 years, wars have been increasing in violence, and the animosity between big powers keeps increasing. Including in our continent.
The book, I should say, is very easy to read, very, very clear, and small. You can read it very quickly, but it begins with how we got into this mess with Enrico Fermi. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, it's an Italian. Italians invented a lot of bad things. One is fascism, and one is the nuclear bombs, the atomic power used in this way. Fermi did this without actually realizing he was doing that at the beginning. It was an experiment in a laboratory. This was a time in which radioactive materials were being studied, discovered, were still mysterious, and he was using radioactive materials, radio and other things, to irradiate different elements, and he was irradiating uranium, and to his surprise, at some point, by doing some tricks, it turned out that uranium was being transformed in something else, some different element. At the beginning, he misunderstood what was happening. In fact, my book is a long list of misunderstandings and errors. It's almost a funny story or a tragic story of constant misreading reality by scientists, by politicians, by people, by everybody. He thought that uranium had been transformed into some heavier element by absorbing the particle of the radiation. But shortly after, it was realized that the nuclei of uranium were actually broken in two by the bombardment with the radiation. And immediately after, we realized by breaking in two, the atoms would liberate new radiation, new neutrons that would break other atoms that in turn would break and emit new neutrons and so on, triggering what is called a chain reaction. And the chain reaction very rapidly destroy all the atoms of a kilograms of 100 grams of uranium, liberating a colossal amount of energy, and that's a bomb.
So how do we get from that to the arms race of the Second World War?
We got to another extraordinary misunderstanding, which, again, I think there's much to learn from these misunderstandings. The Americans and the British got convinced that the Germans were building a super bomb out of that, which was not the case. The German scientists had estimated that there was no way to build a bomb in a useful time for the war, say. So they did not really put any energy into that. But the other side of the big clash, the US, with the help of the UK, got convinced that the Germans were building a super bomb with nuclear power. That was not the case. And out of this extraordinary fear that Hitler could have a super bomb, America put a colossal effort. We're talking about 1% of its population working on this project, colossal amount of money, in the Manhattan Project, namely the project to build the bomb. So the bomb was built during a major war, so in a moment of total confrontation, because of fear, unjustified fear, that the enemy would have been super aggressive and dangerous. And that's, I think, is a lesson, because so often fear, and very often unmotivated fear, or fear motivated by somebody else being aggressive because he's afraid of us, is what leads humans to massacring each other, even today, right? I mean,
So how would you project it onto
today? Well, look, let me first make a step back. The First World War starts with everybody rearming like now, because everybody else is rearming like now, and the economy is being separated, and alliances being established, and people putting colossal amount of money in rearmament with the objective of overpowering an enemy like now. Nowadays, it's the same. I mean, let me start from the simplest case. Israel is very aggressive because it's afraid of whatever it has around it. Iran is aggressive because it wants to have a nuclear bomb because it's afraid of being bombed by the Americans and Israeli, which in fact is, this one is motivated. China is afraid of being squeezed by America. Europe is afraid of Russia and its aggressivity. Russia, if you talk to the Russians, are afraid of being squeezed by the West. So it's fear of the others that fuels this aggressivity. Even if you look at the enormous explosion of aggressivity was Nazi German, if you read Hitler and what was said at the beginning of this horrible adventure, is not we are the stronger, we are going to run the world. It is the opposite. It is we lost the war. We Germans are spread, separated in different countries, squeezed by the enemy, squeezed by the war payment that Germany had to do. They're killing us, they're destroying us. So fear of being destroyed, and therefore, that's Hitler. Therefore, we have to become very strong. The folk has to unite. We have to become very powerful. And this is what the way we can overcome fear. We know how it landed. Germany was allowed to rearm by the powers of the time, London and Paris, in anti-Russian function, because there was Soviet communist Russia, so Churchill considered the Bolshevik the worst of the dangers. So Germany rearmed for fear of Russian communism in the West, and then Stalin rearmed very rapidly when he got afraid that Hitler was going to attack it, which in fact he did. So it's this constantly being aggressive for fear of somebody being aggressive against us. And obviously the way, the first line of my book is humanity has one main enemy, which is its own irrationality. It's obviously more reasonable to not to kill one another. Okay, which we have realized well within countries. Right? Scotland and England don't kill one another anymore. They may disagree on things, of course they do. Florence and Pisa, which were a long time in war with one another, I mean, they still disagree, but nobody think of killing one another. We have learned to live together within countries. Why can't we learn to live together among countries? Ways to change the world. Here is a question. Can't we be reasonable? And I think that the presence of the nuclear danger which is real, is close, it could happen very, very soon, should be one strong argument for saying not we have to overpower the others and we have to be more aggressive than the other, but we should go into the mindset of being the one. After all, the West is still, to some extent, dominant, to lead the world toward a decrease of confrontation. We have to live together. We have to share this world, not to win the others. The problem, just say the problem of the war in nuclear age is not to win the next war, is to avoid the war.
I mean, you say, can't we be reasonable? And you have quite a controversial, way of approaching that with regard to the Second World War. How could you have been reasonable with Hitler? What is your argument? I mean, are you saying that there should have been a deal between, in today's parlance, between Germany and Poland that the world should have allowed?
I say that at that time, a lot of people in London were working for a deal between Germany and Poland. In fact, at some point, London diplomacy was convinced that having reached it and having convinced the Polish to accept the deals. The situation in the 30s was that everybody was talking about the German issue, the German problem. Namely, at the end of the Second World War, all the German population had been broken between Austria, Germany, part of what is Czechoslovakia now, the Sudeti, and Poland. And Austria joined Germany by its own will. Hitler didn't conquer Austria. Austria asked to be, big part, the dominant part of Austria demanded that. What happened with the Sudeti, with the population of the German population in what was then the Czechoslovakia, later the Czech Republic, was the famous episode which is always told by Chamberlain, who sort of agreed with allowing Hitler to take in this part of the population, which was in large part willing to join Germany. We sort of forget these details somehow in war. It's not that Germany invaded a population that was resisting. It was a population that was asking in large part to be. Poland was more complicated, but was similar. There was a German population in the south of Poland, and there were a lot of people who were saying, including in London, let's solve the problem and get a solution of the so-called German issue. Remember that Hitler had a lot of sympathy in Paris and in London because of the communism, and there was a fear of communism was very, very strong. I just quoted the Churchill saying Bolshevik is the most important problem of all. The Second World War started for all sorts of reasons, including the love of war, fascism and Nazism. But we got there through the Spanish Civil War, where a legitimate democratic government was taken down by a fascist revolt by Franco. And the legitimate democratic government was supported by the Soviet Union, while London and Paris, which were the power at the time, were sort of hesitating between, should we help in the Spanish Civil War the government, the legitimate government, but the communists and the socialists and the anarchists are on that side, or should we maybe let Franco prevail, which is supported by fascism? And, England and France definitely didn't help the democracy and the elected Republican government to survive. They let Franco take it. So look at it with the eyes of the time. I think very often dominant class prefer fascism to communism. That's an old story, but we tend to forget all this old story. Even in 1942, when Hitler had got to Paris and got a lot of Central Europe, there was a lot of discussion still in London. Should we just, stop here and we, England, dominate the planet and German dominate the continent? and together face Russia? Or can we perhaps play it the other way around, get allied with Bolshevik Russia, if we can push Germany to attack Bolshevik Russia? So the thing was very complicated. To say that the Second World War is because of Chamberlain is analogous to say, oh, the Second World War came because London failed convincing the Polish to giving a little bit of land to Germany would have appeased the thing. These are, you don't do history with if and then, but to argue that the obvious thing to do was to destroy Hitler after what has happened, it seemed to me a bit flattening history in what it has not been.
So how do you apply this to the current situation in Europe, where Russia and Ukraine is the thing that is driving the push for rearmament in countries like this one? Are you saying similarly that there are people in the east of Ukraine who would like to be part of Russia and that there should just be a deal and that's how you avoid an escalation?
I don't know if there are people and I don't know how many people are there in Donbass or in Crimea, what they would like to do. But I think that regarding the current situation, Russia always did something criminal, invading Ukraine, starting a bloody war, did something stupid, because I think everybody's sure that if Putin and the deciding elite in Moscow had known that was the result, 2026, they wouldn't have done something so stupid. So they obviously try to get out of that. Russia, it's a very peculiar story, because on the one hand, they can't even get to Kiev. So to think that they could get to Paris or London, it's ridiculous. Russia today has the GDP of Italy. So can it win against Italy, Germany, France, all the other countries, Poland, etc.? Obviously not. So Europe is not in any danger of a direct aggression to Russia. I think everybody's saying the opposite. It's not in good faith. However, there are problems, obviously, and the Donbass is not the only one. There are the Balkans also, so it's not that there are no problems. And however, Russia has 4,000 nuclear warheads. It's the biggest nuclear power in the world. So to the people who are saying, oh, let's rearm, I say, what are you willing to be the situation between Europe and including UK and Russia 10 years in the future or 15 years in the future? What do you want? Do you want permanent war? Do we want a squeezed Russia that lost the war with 4,000 nuclear weapons? Obviously, before being destroyed, Russia is going to use these weapons, okay? Do you want to play in a way that somehow we do a war, but they are so reasonable they don't use nuclear weapons, even they have 10 times the nuclear weapons of Europe, more? What do they want? What is the long-term aim? It seems to me that the only long-term aim is to say to the Russian elite, which for 10 years, no doubt about that, in the past, just was looking for living together with Europeans, right? When they themselves took down the Soviet Union completely and sort of said, bye-bye communism, we become capitalists like you, we want to invite at the table. That's clearly what they wanted for a long time. It didn't work, doesn't matter whose fault is it and how it happened. We have to find a way for living together. So the long term should be, the debate should be, where do we want to get at? Not what we do tomorrow. Tomorrow we make more weapons, and then what? We use these weapons? We don't use them? We just have the weapons so that what? So that Russia does not invade Poland? Come on, Russia is not.
So do you think the language of defense is fundamentally dishonest? That it's not really about defense?
of course it's fundamentally dishonest, but what I think it's worth is that I'm using all my ability to understand what the political deciding class in Europe wants on the long term. And I think I'm understanding that they don't know what they want. They are going day after day what is popular. Now there's a big feeling that the United States is not defending us, so what? So let's get armed. I had a conversation with a person in the German Foreign Office, a top-level non-politician, and I asked the question explicitly. Okay, so where are you aiming at being with Russia 10 years in the future? Answer, we have no idea. I mean, come on. I mean, do we have politicians who look long time? And in the discussion about the armament, do we keep in mind that there is a serious risk of a nuclear catastrophe? Humans always fall into war. So far, we have been spared a major world war for 50 years, in a sense, thanks to nuclear weapons, because deterrence, even with this Chile madness, has worked. Okay, now deterrence is over because the treaties that were implementing deterrence, namely a situation in which a first use would be suicidal, so nobody could do the first use because it would have been destroyed immediately. Now this is gone. The START treaties are gone. The intermediate range treaties are gone. The wisdom of the World War, when the Kennedys on one side and the Khrushchev on the other side said, wait a minute, we both take a step back because we don't want to go to war. It's over. We now go to war. And we are playing with fire. It's a fact. Let me put it this way. It's a fact that the policy of Russia today is to use nuclear weapons if they are attacked on their territory. St. Petersburg was bombed 2 weeks ago by an Ukrainian decision, but with weapons which are, I don't know, German, British, maybe American, French weapons. So seeing from the perspective of Moscow is Western Europe, which is attacking there. Is that what we want? To push to play the guerrillas and bring this to the more and more on the threshold of a catastrophe? I think this is silly. I really think this is silly. And if I look back in time, a week before the start of the First World War, nobody expected the First World War to start. Everybody was rearming, thinking if we are strong enough, nobody's going to attack us. And then, Austria declared war to Serbia, Russia, because of the alliance, to Austria, and then who was the next? French declared war to Austria, the German came in, and then the British. So, and it was a disaster. 100 million people in the two world war, which are sequenced one after the other, killed. Why do we want to go in this way? Isn't there anybody who think on the long term, who think rationally, and think, let's calm down, let's talk about cool heads? Can we move instead than in the direction, let's be the guerrilla more strong than anybody else? When it moves in the direction, let's get back to the ideas, United Nations, international legality, the things that we have been taken down. We, I mean, your country, my country, the US, we've been the first to break international legality. When even our allies were saying, don't do that, that's a mistake, we're going to pay that 10 years later. Here we are, we're paying it 10 years later. We can't even say, as it would be obviously reasonable, Russia has misbehaved horrendously invading Ukraine. Of course it has. But we have participated to dozens of wars which are illegal. Afghanistan, second Iraqi war, Libya, Syria, not to mention all the Central American wars, maybe 20, 30 wars have been all illegal. Okay, and then, of course, now we can't even use the argument, the Russians broke international legality. Of course they did. But can't we argue for international equality, for the United Nations, for working together in a moment in which the world is asking for that? And by the world, I don't mean a small percentage of the world, which is a Western country that call themselves the international community. I mean, China, Brazil, India, Indonesia. There's a large majority of the planet which actually is asking for international equality, more power at the United Nations. Last week, there was a white paper by China on that. Why are we not following this lead of reasonable people?
Can you tell me about the bad conscience of physicists? What do you mean by that?
Well, you could ask me, why do you as a physicist are so worried about that? One reason is because I think that every intellectual, everybody who is not in the day-to-day work of politics, like many politicians are, but could see things a little bit from a distance and could think of ways to change the world, should debate about that. I'm not claiming I'm right. I'm saying, can we talk about that? But as a physicist specifically, I mean, we made the atomic bomb. Not me, but there is a sort of collective guilt here, which works not in all scientists, sure. Many would say, no, what is Carlo doing? What is Carlo saying? That's nonsense. But many would agree with this. In fact, Nobel Prize, David Gross recently gave a talk in Munich saying essentially in a shorter way the same thing I'm saying, namely, we're playing with fire, careful. This is completely crazy, this bellicosity. Calm it down. Physicists feel that they've given humankind, some physicists, they feel that they've given humankind a gift that turned out to be an incredibly poisoned gift. Humankind has the means to self-destroy itself. Physicists raised their voice in the 50s quite strongly. Einstein, together with Russell, and were the first who say to humanity as a whole, careful, stop the madness of the nuclear weapons, find a way to control it together. Physicist organizations like Pugwash conferences were very vocal. Scientists started studying the disaster of a nuclear winter, the effect of a nuclear war. They raised the alarm in the 50s, in the 60s. They were heard. Then this all somehow went into the waste basket of history, was forgotten, and now it's coming again, the danger, with the additional danger that people are not aware of that. And I think physicists are the first ones, but everybody should. Journalists, politicians, people voting, contribute to taking this serious existential risk away.
And why have you spent quite a bit of time in the book talking about Heisenberg and defending him from the accusations that he was essentially
working for Hitler? For two different reasons. One is that I admire a lot Heisenberg as a scientist. This has nothing to do, of course, with the story. Somebody could be a great scientist and a moron. Yes, of course. We have examples. But I have a lot of affection for Heisenberg. So I spent some time reading various biographies of him, and I think he doesn't deserve this. He was not a Nazi at all. He disliked strongly, he as his friend disliked strongly the Nazi regime. To say that he was a Nazi would be like saying today that everybody who is in the US and work for the US, it's a fanatic of Trump. It's not true. I mean, the people who are, people who are not. He didn't escape. He was loyal to Germany.
He was a nationalist.
No, he was not a nationalist. He was loyal to Germany. It's different. He was somebody who disturbed many because he accepted the complexity of reality and didn't read the world in black and white completely. And this seems wisdom to me, not stupidity. Of course, he saw the bad of Nazism. Maybe he did a mistake in life. I don't want to define that. But the reason he was accused, and that's the second reason for which I wrote at length about him, is that there was a big part of the community of theoretical scientists who had escaped to the US and pushed for atomic construction of the atomic bomb very strongly, very violently, and convincing the politicians in the US to build the bomb. And then after the war realized that Heisenberg was not doing that. So they found themselves, some of these had some level of morality, they found themselves in an extraordinarily difficult moral position of having contributed to extremely dangerous weapons that already killed 200,000 human beings in Japan and was the risk of killing many, many more of them, because they were accusing Heisenberg of willing to do that, and then discovering that Heisenberg hadn't done that. And the strange moral position in which, remember, after the war, and we still are in that mood, Germany lost the war and Nazi Germany became absolute evil. I'm politically as far away as Nazism as you can imagine. But I don't believe in absolute evil. I don't believe in absolute good. I believe in the complexity. I hate Nazism. I think it was a good idea to fight Nazism. But things are always complicated. And the idea for many scientists that a young, relatively young scientist, super good, Nobel Prize, inventor of quantum mechanics, could not have taken their moral stance against Nazism, and yet not having done the thing they were accusing him to, and in fact coming out morally clean as far as nuclear weapons were considered. That, I think, was the origin of a lot of animosity of people against Heisenberg. Many of them were friends of him. I mean, we have pictures of them, young kids, playing and laughing together, and they could never talk again.
But what do you think is the lesson for scientists then of what happened there in terms of collaborating and cooperating with international governments as they rearm? Should scientists withdraw their labor?
Scientists should keep talking with one another across the political separation, as they were able to do again during the Cold War. The Cold War, many scientists in the West kept strong ties with Soviet scientists and vice versa, sometimes putting themselves in a difficulty with their reciprocal governments because of being accused of not being loyal. Right? Loyalty sometimes is horrible, because loyalty is the first step toward tribalism and toward willing to destroy another tribe for the glory of yours. That's what you don't want. So scientists should use their natural internationalism for helping taking down the tension, for communicating. And what the scientists astonishingly failed during the Second World War was simply to communicate. It would have not been so hard to talk between Fermi and Heisenberg, or Heisenberg and Niels Bohr. They loved one another, and yet they had a one-day conversation which ended bad, and they didn't communicate. If they had communicated, maybe nuclear weapons could have been developed in a time of peace after the end of the war. In fact, they were developed. They were finished after the war in Europe, but not after the end of the war in Japan. And we could be in the same situation of biological weapons or chemical weapons. I mean, why there isn't a bulletin of scientists that raise a great alarm about biological weapons or chemical weapons? That can be even worse in a sense than biological weapons. Because there is an international consensus, and it's an ethical consensus about scientists, there's a consensus about humankind that biological weapons are a bad idea. So every laboratory in the world is controlled by somebody. There are international bodies that control research in biology. There was a guy in Korea that misbehaved and did something, has been ostracized by the entire sciences community because he did some cloning that was not considered good at the time. So could have been the same for nuclear weapons. Humankind, in fact, a little bit, there was an attempt to do that. The current, the UN has a body for controlling nuclear weapons, is what now is being discussed, going back to Iran to check and it's the kind of body that the Soviet Union and US agreed that send respect to one another. So let's see where they are. So if nuclear weapons had been developed in a time of peace, maybe we would not be in this crazy situation in which we have because that's where we literally are. I need to repeat this. We're one push of a finger away from total destruction. You and I be burned alive in a few minutes by thousands and thousands, more than 10,000, I think 12,000 warheads in different parts of the world pointing to one another. And your country and my country are the first one to be destroyed, of course, because our countries, UK and Italy, are full. UK has its own nuclear weapons, but in addition, it has United States weapons, which, the Americans conveniently put that in Europe so that not only they can attack easier, but also they function for protecting America, because Russia has to destroy the weapons in Europe before you have to destroy the nuclear weapons.
So we might be first, as we mean.
Yes. I mean, Northern Italy and England are the first to be wiped out from the geography.
I mean, you talked about the danger of AI perhaps taking over the decision-making. A lot of people compare the development of AI to the Manhattan Project. Do you see that comparison? And what do you think the lesson is for those technologists, if you like, those people developing AI right now, to say, well, hang on, look at history. What can we learn?
This is a comparison often made. I wish the people making the comparison were remembering that the nuclear story is still a problem today. AI certainly comes with dangers. One danger is the one I just mentioned. So in conjunction with nuclear weapons, AI might make more probable a war to start, because you make these automatic decisions, because it's an issue of minutes for responding. An AI system might decide to send it in situations where a human could have said, no, wait a minute, we're not there. So definitely it increases the risk. And the reason it increases the risk is that the governments are in a whatever situation. Namely, if they don't use AI for nuclear weapons, the enemy can use it as an advantage. If you do use AI, you render the escalation more probable. So what do you do? Do you risk again? I mean, if you can't work together and diminish the risk together, we are trapped in this kind of games, right? Do I make more weapons and increase the probability of having a war? Or if I don't make weapons and I feel that the other is more powerful? So this is AI connected to weapons. AI by itself, my sense is that it might be overestimated, the risk that it poses. But there are some kind of risk connected to AI. It depends on whether or not the extrapolation of what AI is going to do in the next years, it's correct or not. So AI as it is now is not so powerful, but people say, oh, it might become much more powerful in the future. Now, the analogy here with the situation with nuclear weapons is that instead of addressing this as an international problem, it has been addressed by the three powers in the game, three big powers, the game, which are United States, Europe, and China, in completely opposite manners. The Chinese approach is that the government should control it. So nothing should happen without some wise, they say, people in the top leadership of the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party, to be sure what is going on. So that's, and the Communist Party is saying, we're assuring the people, don't worry, we have control. The European attitude is different. The European approach to this is let's regulate, let's write regulations. The American attitude is completely different again. The American attitude is regulations are bad and are what is squeezing the possibility of research and growth. And government control is bad because it's communist and the government is bad. You know, the American attitude is government should be as small as possible. We don't want government, we don't trust government. And therefore, the individual private entities, big companies that have developed AI, they should auto-regulate themselves. Remember that current investment in the hope that AI will give colossal economic return is order of $1 trillion. So $1 trillion or euros, whatever, has been put into the market, has been given to the market, expecting this will pay back in economical development. Well, whether it would or not, I'm not an economist, but I'm not putting my money there. So there are these three completely different, opposite attitudes toward regulating AI, which are, of course, in competition with one another. They're opposite one another. Nobody's even talking or saying, wait a minute, could the Chinese, European, and the Americans sit together and say, we have to learn how to trust one another and make a United Nations committee and overseeing all that and seeing where the dangers are. That's not happening. And that seemed the problem. Instead of working for the good of humankind is a problem. AI is dangerous. Good, that's a common problem. How to do it? Well, I make my own more powerful than yours. That's a bad solution to the problem because the opposite part want to make his own more powerful than yours. And then we do damage to one another. Can we be rational? That's, as a scientist, what I'm trying to propose to make a way of changing the world. A little bit of more rationality and a little less tribalism.
Carlo Rovelli, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.